there's a need out there to help bring awareness of the therapies, help improve access by making patients more aware. And our platform brings patients into our platform and helps them through our AI algorithm, match them to a treatment center and specialist closest to them. And it cuts that time down from weeks down to hours.
Welcome to Biotech Bytes. I'm your host, Steve Swan, where we chat with leaders in the biotech industry. Coming up, join me for a spirited discussion with Chris Leidli, CEO and founder of Genoplex.ai, a technology company helping patients understand what gene therapies are available for the particular ailments that they have. Great conversation. Hope to see you there. Chris, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Steve, I'm awesome, my friend. Excited to be on your show and speak with you here today. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure thing. Yeah, no. So I think first what I usually like doing with guests is just getting a kind of an overview of their background, how they got to where they are. So, and then kind of leading into, their organization and what their group does and what their organization does. So why don't you give me a little background leading up to Genoplex AI and kind of go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually started early career as a molecular biologist in the labs at Amgen. It was my first job out of graduate school, where I was working already on many of the precision medicines and advanced therapies. I've sort of come full circle in my career back to that. So let me explain. I sort of worked my way through advanced therapies and molecular biology at Amgen, where a lot of the tools back then of recombinant DNA technology and cloning genes and making new proteins and things for to alleviate human suffering, that was the beginning of the revolution for true advanced therapies. And I would say through the years, I've worked in various research, development, and then commercialization roles at leading companies like J&J, Bayer, and Sanofi. And 6 years ago, I saw the future potential of advanced therapies, and let me define that for the audience. I mean, these are things like cell therapies, gene therapies, other types of biologics, where oftentimes the starting material for the therapy is the patient's own cells. And we'll get more into that, but I think the beauty of this is that we now have the tools, the technology many years later. So I would say 7 or 8 years ago, the first cell therapies were approved. And I started a marketing agency, a boutique agency that was focused exclusively on these advanced therapies. It was through that process of working with many of the leaders in this space, like Kite Therapeutics, Legend Bio, Janssen, and others, and Iovance, that I learned that there's an opportunity here to bring technology in to help solve some of the biggest commercialization challenges. And that's what led me to start up Genoplex.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, so I guess to give us a foundation, let's assume somebody doesn't know, right? They're watching this and like, that sounds kind of cool. But what is the difference? Is there a high level difference that we can talk about between cell therapy, gene therapy, T cells, right? Because we hear all three of those. Is there a difference between all three of those? I'm sure the marketing and such might be the same. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave that open to you. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's break it down. So let's maybe start with this, Steve, and say that, most of us are familiar with the healthcare system that was really built over many decades, right? That was really built around pills and treating symptoms and taking prescriptions and going to a pharmacy, right? Sometimes you might get injections, right? Things like that. That's kind of what I call pharmaceuticals 1.0. We're now on pharmaceuticals like 2.0, 3.0 with advanced therapies, because what's different about them is when we talk about cell and gene therapies, many times to start the manufacturing process, your cells are your own drug. That's the beauty of it. But that often requires now patients to go through a procedure called apheresis or tumor procurement, where your cells need to be harvested through a minor procedure to get the cells. It goes to a manufacturer where those cells are prepared and sometimes genetically modified, sometimes not. And then they're amplified and grown in nutrients that kind of can be reinfused back to the patient. And what's beautiful about these, Steve, is they're oftentimes one-time treatments, oftentimes with very long cures. So that's some of the difference when we think about cell therapies and gene therapies. T cells are often one of the sources, the starting materials that you mentioned. But it can be other types of cells as well. Any cell type from your body could generally be used as what we call starting material for the drug.
Okay. Okay. And in the US today, granted approval by the FDA, how many different therapies are there? How many different drugs are there that are already approved and on the market, gene therapy drugs, right?
So, a combination of gene therapies and cell therapies, I would say, if we just look at those, and I'm not even talking about some of the other biologics and other things that we focus on, but there's over 30 products approved since 8 years ago when the first ones were approved. And boy, we've got amazing cell therapies. And let's talk about a gene therapy, for example. Casgevy is a product. There's two therapies that have been approved for sickle cell disease. So this is a much larger prevalent indication, right? Affecting a lot of people, especially people of color. And so there's a global worldwide health burden with sickle cell disease. And so amazing to see that we're seeing these one-time treatments that are actually curing and repairing that defective hemoglobin gene that's making the red blood cells normal again, Steve. So tremendous. That's just one example of many that I could share around the truly innovative impact that we have with these new therapies.
Now, this is awesome technology, and this is great stuff that's going to help, like you said, millions and millions of people. My brain instantly went to when you just said that it's global, right? So if there's a global need for something, again, this is now all the way down at the lowest level, and where a knucklehead like me, like think about this. How are you going to manufacture that halfway around the world or get it halfway around the world? Does it have to be refrigerated? Does it have to be the final mixation done locally? I mean, how does that all there's a huge supply chain thing going on there, correct?
Oh, Steve, you're hit it on the head. I mean, the supply chain is already complicated enough, even in, I would say, a high resource country like the U.S. But when you think about, like I interviewed someone on my podcast with sickle cell disease recently he's from Nigeria. And he said, in African countries where sickle cell disease is prevalent, it's evolved as a way for the body to defend against malaria, by the way. So it's interesting how that sickling actually was an evolutionary process to help protect us, but in doing so is harmful. But those countries are more low resource. Those patients don't have access to many of these therapies right now. There are no centers in Africa that I'm aware of where patients can go and get these therapies. So they often have to travel to Europe or the US for now. Hope that's part of the global challenge of how we try and improve access globally to these life-saving therapies.
So now we got an issue of the haves and the have-nots, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's regrettably that's
Unfortunately.
just a health equity issue, or that the entire healthcare system faces around the world, right?
Sure, yeah, that's tough. I mean, there's a lot of different inputs that go into that, right? And to get to everybody that needs it, that's tough. I had a conversation with somebody in the past about, the whole organ donation business, and they're growing some animal organs where they can, and they've been transplanting them into humans. Again, it's just a matter of getting things there. It's that supply chain is how is it going to work, And I think with all these things, it's a huge challenge. I'm sure, right?
Well, imagine it's complicated enough. I know a lot of like the Bill Gates Foundation, others they buy vaccines and ship them to low resource countries around the world, and see that also requires some complex supply chain because many of those need to be refrigerated or frozen. But even just simple medicines, pills, what those are getting to countries that in need. But these, because again the starting material is patients' own cells, you can't just make them in the U.S. somewhere and just bulk distribute them to patients actually have to go to a treatment center somewhere, and that's kind of the nuance of the supply chain that makes access so difficult.
Well, they've got to go to the center, and I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, right? They've got to get their cells. They've got to manufacture, grow, whatever they got to do to get the dosage to where it needs to be, right? So they've got to hang
Right.
around,
That's
to
right.
get it to where it needs to be. So
That's right. That patients do often have to wait several weeks. They have to be close to the treatment center for the follow-up care, for the infusion, to help manage any potential side effects, of which there oftentimes aren't many side effects with these therapies. But without getting too much into detail, sometimes there are sort of bridging therapies that are used that do introduce some toxicities that do have to be managed during part of the overall regimen.
sure, yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so there's 30 plus, right, of these
Yeah.
therapies out there. And so so Chris saw a gap. Chris was involved with these companies. What's the gap
Right.
you saw, and what's the gap that you're working on with your organization, with your company?
The gap that we're trying to fix, the pain points are this. In the 8 years since these products have been introduced, and by the way, this market's expected to double in size in the next, before the end of the decade. What we're finding, what I learned is that only about 1 or 2 out of 10 patients actually gets to a treatment center. So all of those patients who could benefit from these therapies, that's really not very many of them. Not many of them are actually getting to the treatment centers. There's a lot of reasons for it. Um, on the health, so in the U.S., most of the care in the country is given out in community settings. Right? Not everybody goes to Memorial Sloan Kettering or Moffitt Cancer Center for their treatments. They're out in communities. I live in a rural part of Colorado. So it depends on a referral from your provider to one of these 100 or 200 treatment centers around the country who are qualified. It's a very rigorous regulatory process to be qualified to be able to treat patients with these therapies. And so what we learned is that more than half of healthcare providers around the country just say that the intake process, the referral process is too cumbersome, the logistics are too complicated, and it takes too long. The intake process is too long at the hospitals. So when on the hospital side, they're still using faxes, voicemails, emails, you know, for the patient follow-up. So if anyone's ever tried to schedule an appointment with a specialist at one of these centers, it can take weeks, right? So, but if you've got cancer, let's say, you know, every day you're waiting, your disease is progressing, right? What happens is that even the patients that sometimes get to the treatment center, their disease is now progressed and they're no longer even eligible for these treatments. So there's a need out there to really to help bring awareness of the therapies, help improve, access by making patients more aware. And our platform brings patients into our platform and helps them through our AI algorithm, match them to a treatment center and specialist closest to them. And it cuts that time down from weeks down to hours.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, because when I do my, you know, I'm an executive recruiter, technology within the biotechs and pharmas, right? And there's a lot of the companies all the way along the process who I've helped to create patient and provider and payer, right? And someone's got to pay eventually, but create those portals. And there's a lot of data that flows in and out of those things. And to your point, well, there's also got to be a lot of security. Again, I'm thinking about all the technology around it,
Right.
right? Because there's a lot of data.
You're right.
But
Yep.
there's a lot of data that flows in and out of there, and there's a lot of people that are involved with each part of that process. Whether it's again the doctor or the patient or the payer or the manufacturing folks slash scientists, right, doing all that work. So there's a lot of stuff going on just around that one person's dosage, right? Because each one's individualized. We're not just punching out pills. We're doing one dose. One manufacturing person's taking one dose from end zone to end zone. And then once that's done, they're getting the next one going, that kind of thing. Right. So it's very individualized. So
It's very individualized. You're right. And, the American College of Physicians has put out white papers about the need for primary care specialists to make referrals to specialists and be more aggressive, I guess is the word, to sort of be more proactive and aggressive in making those referrals to specialists, because we have so many of these therapies that can only be administered in these special academic centers around the country. You would think that, everybody knows who to refer to, but, there's so many new products, so many indications. A lot of these relationships aren't in place. Like if I'm a physician out in some part of the country I don't know people in the treatment center that I need to refer to. So this is a resource for referring physicians to help them get patients in, because it seems easy, but the process is not streamlined.
it sounds like it's not. So then what you're doing is you're taking that data, you're figuring out, or or somehow who's been diagnosed or potentially diagnosed with X, Y, and Z, and then what treatment centers and organizations have those cell therapies that are approved for that particular ailment, and then you're trying to get more folks involved with that therapy so they're better. They get better treatment, right?
we're forecasting that that we'll have a few thousand users in our platform by end of the year, and these are high value patients because these are expensive therapies. Um, they're motivated to find treatments. It's all about timeliness. We know that reducing the time from being symptom aware to diagnosis to treatment, if you can compress that time, we already know there's already data that shows that you improve health outcomes. You improve patients' clinical outcomes if you can just get them the treatments they need faster. And that's ultimately the ultimate metric that we want to try to deliver on, is getting patients to these therapies faster.
So you are directly in touch with patients or doctors or providers or all three?
Actually, all of them, because our user flow in our software, you can come in as a referring physician or as a patient. We have two different user flows. So physicians can come in, make a referral. And the beauty of it is, Steve, they have a referral dashboard. One of the things physicians, when they refer, is they don't know what happens to their patient. So we've
Right.
proactively built in like these dashboards. They can go log in, look at the patients they referred, and see where are they in their treatment journey what's their status in the treatment journey. And we also provide notifications on when that patient's coming back when they're done with treatment. So
That's
we're
awesome.
closing the loop on those communications. So the entire care team is aware of where that patient is throughout their journey.
That's awesome. That's good stuff. That keeps everybody, in the loop. And those doctors, obviously, they're primary care physicians. So they're going to care about their patients and where they're going and what they're doing. So that's awesome stuff. So then the companies, so hold on. Let me back up here. So 30 different therapies plus or minus, right? In the country. What what ailments, what sort of indications are the 30 or 33 for? Are they all for different things, or are they
They're
for
all for different things.
relatively?
So it started out, the first therapies were approved in blood cancers, things like lymphoma, leukemia, myeloma, where, by the way, the response rates are almost 100%, which means nearly every patient who gets this therapy has a response. And then it's just a question of, is it, how durable, how long is the response? But many of these responses are going out years. And these are in patients that maybe had very poor prognoses, Steve. That's where it started. So in those indications, we've just seen last year our first approval by Iovance in with their product, cell therapy product, in melanoma. So the excitement in the field now is that we're starting to move into other sort of solid tumor types, moving out of blood cancers into solid tumors, things like melanoma, lung cancer. And now we're starting to see a lot of excitement and activity in autoimmune diseases. So things like lupus and other sort of immune activation, because a lot of those are blood cell activated, sort of hyperactivated cells that cause these autoimmune diseases. So there's a lot of excitement and hope there. And as I mentioned, we're going into much larger patient populations with things like there's two approved therapies for sickle cell disease, and and even some for hemophilia as well. And so those are reaching different patient populations, at much bigger, more prevalent indications.
This is completely, just self. This is. Do we have anything coming or anything around for GBM, glioblastoma, or have we not gotten to that yet? We can't get the blood-brain barrier, from what I understand, is the big hindrance there. So
I just interviewed the chief. Well, it's actually the president at Diakonos Oncology, they're developing a type of dendritic cell therapy. So that's at the dendritic cells. Steve, you asked earlier about the different, like, T cells and all that. Dendritic cells, they're a type of T cell or white blood cell that people may have heard of, or that they're engineering it so that it can actually get into the blood-brain barrier. And they've shown some preliminary data in pancreas cancer, for example, and
really,
glioblastoma. Those are two of the hardest cancers to treat. So there's
those
a
are
lot
the
of
emperors
excitement.
of all maladies. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there is exploration in that area, but nothing yet approved.
Really? That's very cool.
Yeah,
Fingers
yeah,
crossed. I lost a
yeah. Me
brother to
too. Fingers
GBM
crossed for that one.
yeah, I lost a brother to GBM in 2023. He made it 10 plus years, which is huge, long time, but, it's you're running as fast as you can for as long as you can. So,
Right.
but, something like this, like you said, it sounds like the response rates on these things when someone gets involved is very, very high, you know, once they're
That's definitely been the promise. Now, like, in the solid tumor space, the response rates have been a little bit lower. But those that do respond, they have very long, durable responses. So, when you think like in the melanoma space, metastatic melanoma I'm talking about, not the sort of basal cell stuff, it used to be patients only had about a 6-month prognosis. Now they're living 5 years, so like it's incredible difference in the duration and how durable these responses can be.
Now, metastatic melanoma is what Jimmy Buffett died of, correct?
I believe so. I don't know his entire
Okay,
story in full
okay.
disclosure, but
Yeah, yeah, okay.
yeah, it's a lot of these diseases, as you mentioned, are kind of they're considered rare diseases, right? There's about 5,000 new metastatic melanoma patients a year in the U.S. Like there's many more
That
patients.
should be higher. Yeah.
Well, the earlier stages, some people have like that's stage 4, but stage 1, 2, 3, there's a lot more of those patients. But that can be effectively treated with other types of interventions.
Yeah, with,
Yeah.
Moe's, they can dig them out and stuff, right?
Mohs is one of them, and there's even now some immunotherapies that are very powerful too. That I would also consider they're types of advanced therapies because they're harnessing the immune system to kind of fight the cancer. So
I think
those
that's just awesome. Immunology is just it just blows my mind, in a great way, and
well,
that's
it's
what we're
using
doing here.
the strength that yeah, it's using the power of our host directed defenses. So like our immune system was we've come through evolution with our host directed interventions to sort of surveil the body, and anytime there's a foreign intruder to fight it off. That's kind of what's being done with immunotherapies. Up to now, therapies have mostly relied on sort of chemical warfare. A lot of these agents for cancer literally were developed from many of the types of toxins used in the 60s and 70s during warfare. Right, they sort of evolved into therapies, chemotherapies for and that just has like a very broad approach. It just kills all the actively dividing cells in your body. We're being much more precise now, and that's why we're talking about precision medicine, personalized medicines now to really distinguish these much older therapies that are kind of going out of vogue now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the older therapies kinda, like you said, just kinda, go after the entire landscape, tear that down, and then we build it up, right? And
Right. That's right.
hope we got rid of the bad ones, and then we build up the
That's
good
right.
ones.
That's a good way to put it.
Mm. Yeah, that's the best we can do, right? Or we were doing. This is awesome stuff. So now, when you go after, so you're going at, you're talking to and working with patients and doctors. Okay, so that's good. And I bet that the doctors really do love what you're doing, and the patients, once they figure it out, probably are real excited about it. But they didn't know probably anything about any of these therapies because I just mentioned that my brother passed away of GBM. I was responsible for the whole clinicaltrial.gov thing, trying to find clinical trials and stuff. And I bet I'm just assuming that's where a lot of other folks would probably go to get their information. And I would think that maybe your group or you somehow plugs into that, right? To get folks to into some of this, these organizations or drugs, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve, because what we're seeing is there's a lot of investment in new health tech companies spawning around trying to help match patients to clinical trials. And the pharmaceutical companies, of course, they want that because they want to accelerate their clinical development programs to get to market. Um, I really see it as a very crowded space right now, and I don't necessarily know that it's I don't know if technology is going to solve that problem all the way because I don't know if that's addressing the real problem why we don't see more patients in trials. You got to ask yourself, why don't more patients? It's interesting. A lot of what happens is caregivers, like you mentioned, you're a caregiver, you're a family member, you went out there, you're savvy, you're educated, you know how to go find it. I don't think everybody knows how to go to clinicaltrials.gov and find a trial. It's very difficult to navigate, hard to
I didn't know
find.
what to do, man. I was grasping.
That's an interesting part, though. So when you think about a family's treatment journey or a patient's treatment journey, right? A lot of patients are in the same boat you were, Steve. They don't know what to do, but they're desperate. They're looking, they're searching. Some of them come across good information, some of them don't. So that road to getting, as I mentioned earlier, so first you're symptom aware, then you kind of become diagnosis aware once maybe you receive a diagnosis like, okay, now I have melanoma. Then you start the search process and now you're looking for treatments. Are patients looking for trials at that time? No, they're probably looking for treatments, because that's kind of how you're wired. Like I want to find what treatment should I go on, right? And then kind of through their journey, maybe things evolve, and then they start, as they get deeper and deeper into their journey over years, maybe they're starting to look at trials and other things. But our software kind of looks at that as well, but we're not primarily a clinical trials matching. We're focusing on the problem sort of once a product's approved and out in the market, how do we democratize access for patients, make it more available to patients, make them more aware of the treatments that are commercially available that may benefit them before they consider like going to trials.
Yeah. Yeah. And to get that kind of data, there's probably a lot of HIPAA around that as well for you, to, to
Yeah, of course. No,
reach out to them.
we're cloud-based computing, but we have we work in an AWS in a secure environment, following SOC 2 and HIPAA standards in terms of how we protect the data. And
Sure.
cybersecurity is a thing you always have to be concerned about.
Woo.
And we're investing a lot early, even though we're a startup. We're investing a lot there. We're not taking that. We're taking it very seriously, as every health tech company should.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, again, going back to some of the companies that I work with, right, that are doing this kind of work, they sort of have two layers of security. One, like a normal company would have around their corporate structure, right? Their whole G&A, their
Right.
HR, legal, finance, but then a whole nother really, I don't want to call it another set of security, but close to it around that whole manufacturing process, right? Where they take in the patient DNA and where they're doing all that stuff. That's that's the holy grail. They got to hold on to, like you're saying, that's real sensitive stuff, you know?
That stuff all goes into a database somewhere, whether it's on a local server or in a cloud. I mean, it has to be secured, and no database is impenetrable. So you really just have to have a series of layers of security, and then have protocols to active protocols for surveillance, and knowing how to address various risks there. So
Right. Yeah. And all my companies go through that and they talk to me about it and got to work on it. It's
sure.
just, it's part of what they got to do. It's part of doing business. And again, nobody, you, me, the folks that are ill, they don't want their information out there as much as they can protect it. So anyway, um, so what else, anything else we should, know about what you're doing in this whole industry? Tell me, if there's anything more that we need to hit on there. Cause I always have one last question I ask my guests, which is kind of the surprise question at the end. So if you've watched any of my podcasts all the way through, you may know.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we talk a lot about the patients and also the referring physicians, but I have to say one of the things coming out of the big health conference last October in Las Vegas, we're listened to physician leaders, right? And the physicians and healthcare providers at these treatment centers. Now, these are the centers that are actually treating the patients with these advanced therapies, Steve. The other thing that we're trying to solve on the other end of this um, treatment algorithm, is the patient intake process. I mentioned that the process is too slow. So let's say once the patient comes in, we need to accelerate that, because in our customer discovery calls, when we talk to these treatment center, the service line administrators who are actually administering this, they said, they're working on Excel spreadsheets. Each manufacturer has their own portal. It's too much. Like there's 30 medicines. It's going to be 50, 60, 70 by the end of the decade. Each of them has different requirements. There's an effort going on in the industry to standardize the workflows and reduce the number of electronic interfaces. So that's the part I just want to leave your audience with around. Everyone's talking about reducing healthcare provider administrative burden, and kind of a catchphrase that you hear at conferences. And what that really means is freeing up physicians and healthcare providers' times to do more care in the clinic, more patient care, and doing less work, charting, following up the patient, phone calls back and forth. So like scheduling, integrating, accelerating those workflows. It's hard to believe that most treatment centers, Steve, I talk to, they're still using faxes, voicemails, emails, and Excel spreadsheets to manage all the different patients coming in, and then dealing with all of these different provider manufacturing portals. They're just like, they're fed up. They're like, this is not sustainable. It's taking too much of my time. So that's something our software is trying to solve on the provider side, on the treatment center side, by integrating our software with those treatment centers.
Very cool. I
Yeah.
mean, it's got to be done, to your point. it's, faxes and phone calls can only really get you so far, so we've
We've all
gotta
been
do
there,
it.
Steve, right? I mean, call and make an appointment. It's not like you're gonna get in tomorrow, right? It's a
No,
it's a long
no.
process of back and forth.
So if I'm this is another question that just came to mind. If I'm a patient that just got prescribed one of these gene therapies, right? And I don't know, make it up the company that is making the biotech that's making my therapy is in Seattle. I don't know, just throwing that out, right?
Okay.
Do I have to go to a treatment center in Seattle? Is that ideal, or can I do it in LA if I live in LA?
So if you live in LA, you're lucky. You're likely to have a few treatment centers down there. Because so no, let me address your question. So first of all, if a manufacturer, you don't have to go to the location where they physically reside. So in this case, Seattle, you don't have to go to Seattle. What these manufacturers do, like as part of their launch, commercial launch, they have to go and certify or qualify every treatment center. They have to onboard all these treatment centers around the country. So when a product's first approved, Steve, you can't go to 200 treatment centers around the US. There might be 30 or 40 around the country that you can go to in the first year. And then what they do is over time, it's very resource intensive for the company and for the treatment centers. So it's a long 6 to 12-month process. And so it takes several years to expand your network of qualified treatment centers. If you're in one of the big urban areas, you'll likely have a treatment center close to you. But as you know, in the US, Steve, we have huge frontier spaces where wide open spaces where there may not be a treatment center for several hundred miles.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But as long as you're near a big city, chances have it. It reminds me of Chris. It reminds me of. I know I keep drawing on this, but it reminds me of when I was going through clinicaltrial.gov for my brother, and there were two clinical trials we wanted to get him on, but unfortunately, and we didn't know at the time, we didn't have his tumor resected at a participating institution, so they didn't have a slice of his tumor, and so we couldn't take a slice from the place and get it to the new. And so, we just didn't have it. It just was we were in the wrong place, we didn't know, but, um, it sounds like you said, they have to approve the center and they've got to be right on. The one that we went to wasn't far away. It was within 50 miles, but we just didn't, whatever. What did we know? We didn't know anything at the time. You learn this stuff quick, unfortunately, but, at that point we didn't know it. So anyway,
Good example. I
well,
mean, that happens all the time. Yeah.
I bet it does. Bet it does. We just, we didn't know. Read about it all on clinicaltrial.gov, and I was like, okay. So, all right. Well, cool. Thank you very much for that. So, anything else you want to before I ask my last question?
No, let's hear the last question. You've piqued my interest here. It built me up around it. Let's see what you've got.
So, I love music. I love going to see live bands, right?
Okay.
And so, what I always like asking my guests is, if you had to think about live music that you've seen throughout your life, what would have been the best concert, the best show? I have a feeling you're about to show me a poster or something because you're moving your camera. Um,
Yeah.
of
Trying to get, go ahead.
of of any band that you would say has been your, or maybe there's several, but what would you say has been, if and if you don't go to live shows or don't like them, that's fine too. But I just like asking that because I go to a bunch of live shows all the time and never been to Red Rocks, by the way, but I'd love to go and see something there. But anyway,
I'm going to
anything
give you
come to mind?
two because
Uh,
I have to. You'll see why.
yeah,
I have a lot of friends in the Boulder area who love going to concerts and shows, and we do have Red Rocks down the road, and I've seen many shows there.
yeah.
Highly recommend to your audience, anyone who hasn't seen it, their favorite artist or band there, even if they're not your favorite, go see a show at Red Rocks. Absolutely unbelievable. I had the privilege of going with some friends to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers a couple of years ago at Red Rocks. I would say that was my best live show. Amazing music venue, and it was also we saw him just 6 months before Tom Petty died, so it was kinda like one of the last shows he did, so that had a lot of memory for me, and then there was another show that meant a lot to me. Um, we're up in the mountains a lot in the summer, and maybe you may not be familiar, but there's a beautiful outdoor amphitheater in Dillon, up in Summit County, up in the mountains right off Lake Dillon. Um, it's a small outdoor theater, but we saw Brothers Osborne there, and what was beautiful about it, it was during COVID. So if you remember during COVID, there were no concerts, there were no indoor things for a long time. And the fact that like the life was shut down for a year, and then some of the artists started going to outdoor venues. So after a year of lockdown, being able to go out to the Dillon Amphitheater and seeing the Brothers Osborne, sort of a very, energetic, happy music outdoors in the beautiful outdoors in the mountains was pretty spiritual for me. So those two stand out to me, Steve.
Oh, that's great. That's a good story. I like that. Tom Petty never. Well, I was at Live Aid. He was at Live Aid, but I don't consider that. That was 30-minute acts, and then they moved on. So I never saw him. I wish I had. And also at the end of COVID, I went and saw a band up in northern New Jersey. It was springtime. It was a little chilly out, and it was one of those days that was probably like, I don't know, 30-mile-an-hour winds. But we're all standing outside, and it's this dirt field with a stage up there, because we're up in the mountains up in northern New Jersey. It was up in Sussex County, I think, Fairgrounds or something it was. But anyway, I'll never forget that. It was the end of COVID. Everybody was there. Nobody's in seats. Everybody has their cars kind of nearby, but everybody's still staying their distance. You know what I mean? So
Right,
yeah,
right. Well, so
had to
similar
do.
similar story, right? I mean, that was memorable to you because again, it just sort of represented kind of the opening up of society again, being able to go out and do the things you love doing. And yeah, that's a great
Abs-
question. And so
Absolutely.
what's been your favorite concert? Just so that I hear
I
like your
would
favorite
say,
band.
it's funny. Nobody's asked me that back out of 30 plus guests.
Now I need to know.
I would have to say my favorite one concert, and then I can say my favorite band that I like seeing live. So
Okay.
my favorite concert in the probably late '90s was the Red Hot Chili Peppers in Madison Square Garden. Um, they just and MTV was there, and the place was going crazy. It was good. It was fun. And I've never seen them before or since. I was like, I can hang up my spikes now. I think I saw a great concert. My favorite band, though, ever to see live, and I saw them a lot more than I ever want to admit. I probably saw them 50 plus times, were the Allman Brothers. Uh,
Oh,
really, really like seeing
got
the
it.
Allman Brothers. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of the guitars and things like that. Nowadays we go and we see my wife and I go to see Pearl Jam. Saw the Grateful Dead a ton back in the day. I saw Dead and Company out, a lot out there and such. And so yeah, but I'd say the Allman Brothers are my favorite band. And then I'd say the best concert I was ever at was the Chili Peppers at MSG, without a doubt.
Well, you got a diverse musical repertoire and interest, so it's nice to see that people.
Thank
I
you.
love to hear people love different types of genres of music. It really speaks to the soul, doesn't it?
Totally does. And you and I can be at the same. We can have 30,000 people at the same concert. Every single one of us has an individual experience. You know, it's I think it's awesome. I like seeing. We go. We're empty nesters now, right? So we go and we see all different kinds of shows and concerts. I'm a big fan, always have been, of live music. I always noticed even when I was younger, that I gravitated towards a lot of live shows and live recordings. The Who at Woodstock was another favorite one. I probably listened to that forever when I was in 8th and ninth grade. But things like just live music. David Bowie did a live he had the Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, a movie that he did, but he did a live album with it, and that live album is one of my favorites. It's I don't listen to anything else David Bowie. It's just when it's real raw, when it's real down to earth, when there's not a lot of no mixing and stuff like that. I went and saw this past summer. I went and saw Van Halen with Sammy Hagar and stuff. It just felt like it was mixed on stage. I mean, again, Joe
Right.
Satriani's awesome, Sammy Hagar's awesome. They're all awesome, but it just I don't know. It just on stage, you could just hear it and feel it, that it was mixed. But, I remember seeing Soundgarden back in the day. I went and saw Jerry Cantrell, who was the lead singer of Alice in Chains this summer. That was great. Anyway, just all sorts of different stuff. So,
Yeah, I think like you're right. I think some artists just sound different, especially some of these older bands. When you see them now, a lot of like electronic mixing and stuff. I think I did get to see. You mentioned Billy Idol. I got to see Billy Idol at the Boulder Theater. It's a
oh,
venue
nice.
that only holds a few hundred people. He didn't have like a big setup. It's just him and his voice. And my God, he sounded amazing, just like he did 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, he does.
I love going to these small, intimate venues where you can see some of your favorite artists, up close. So, yeah,
I saw him at
fantastic.
Pete Townsend put together the album Quadrophenia by The Who, right? In 2016, he did 5 shows in the United States for quadrophenia, but he did them with backups of an orchestra. So he had 3 shows in Lincoln Center and then 2 shows in LA. And I went to one of the ones in Lincoln Center, and it was awesome. It was crazy. And Billy Idol, because Billy Idol was in that movie. He was the bellboy in Quadrophenia, and so he came out and did his part, and it was pretty cool. And he sounded great. He had he being Pete Townsend had this guy Alfie. I don't even know the Alfie guy's last name, but he was an opera guy, and he was singing Roger Daltrey's part. You know, because Roger Daltrey did most of the album, and quite frankly, Alfie, who was in his late 20s, didn't, in my opinion, sound anywhere near as good as Roger Daltrey when he originally recorded the album back in, I don't know, 73-ish, whatever. Anyway, it was awesome. It was cool. And it was live and it was raw and you could feel it. You could hear it, you know, and you just see the whole symphony up there doing the thing. It was kind of cool. But anyway, I'm off track again.
Yep.
So
No, I love it. I love that. So your last question really got us going.
It did.
Love to hear those stories. So yeah, thanks again, Steve.
Sure. Well, thank you. So this was great. I appreciate it. You know, and thank you for tuning in today to Biotech Bytes. If you enjoyed what you saw with this episode, please take a moment and like us, follow us, review us on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube podcasts. And definitely tune in to Chris's podcast here, RX for Biotech as well.